I felt like I was going to die. I remember when I did my first Ironman Triathlon, going back almost 15 years now, and it really pushed me to the edge. I want to tell you that story today. Recently on the channel, we have been talking about this idea of men needing to do difficult things. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the Jordan Peterson quote regarding this subject, but let's take a listen now.
Find something difficult to do. You need that. You're not built for comfort or pleasure. Like if that comes along, good. You know, if you have a day where you're comfortable and there's some things around you that give pleasure.
As you can hear there from Jordan Peterson, he is of the opinion that men need to do difficult things, difficult tasks, difficult work, difficult adventures in order to become the kind of men that they're supposed to be. He makes the point that if comfort happens to come your way, then so be it, and you can enjoy it, but don't set your life up according to that hope, but rather believe that you are going to need to do difficult things. Well, I agree with that position, and I want to tell you a story from my own life about doing difficult things, and I want to make sure that you watch all the way to the end, because after I share this story, I'm going to tell you the answer to the question of why did I actually do it and what did I learn from that experience. I want to tell you the story today about my first ever Ironman Triathlon. And for those of you who might not be familiar with what that event is about, it's a 3.8 kilometre ocean swim, followed by a 180 kilometre bike ride, and then finally a marathon, 42 kilometre run. As you can imagine, it's an intense day. It's an extreme push that really takes you to the edge. And I remember doing this event back in 2009, December 2009 in Western Australia, and it was a really, really rewarding but extremely difficult and challenging experience. Some of the factors around this day, in my training and my preparation, the furthest I had ever ridden a bike in a training ride was 104 kilometres, which to most people is a really long ride, but in preparation for 180 kilometres really is not enough. I'd done a lot of running, I did a lot of swimming, and I can remember in the lead up to the event, people, even friends, sharing with me the fact that they doubted whether I could get it done. And I found that fascinating because I thought that people believed that I was stronger than I realised they actually thought, but it actually inspired me to say, well, I believe I can get it done, and I'm going to push on and do everything I possibly can do to get this event finished. And I remember on the day we actually had 41 degrees Celsius temperature. It was brutal weather. In the lead up to the event, the week or two before the event, we actually had received reports that on the beaches 5 kilometres either side of the beach where we were supposed to do our swim leg, there had been 6 great white shark sightings, 4 attacks, and 1 fatality. And so knowing that there are great white sharks in the area is not a very comforting way to start your swim leg on a triathlon day. And so I remember there being several shark spotting planes and helicopters in the sky. There were about 30 surf lifesavers on paddle boards. And we also got told that there were about a dozen divers underneath the jetty near where the swim leg was with the shock rods, which is basically a big steel rod with a shotgun shell on the end, in order to help defend the competitors from the possibility of a great white shark appearing in the middle of our race. And I tell you what, it's a great incentive to actually be very, very average as a swimmer on the day. Don't be super fast, don't be super slow, stay in the middle. But we got through that 3.8k swim, and then we went into a 180 kilometre ride, and it's one of the most difficult days of my life. It was 7 hours out in the beating hot sun. We hired bikes, my friend and I. We didn't have our own bikes. All we had was our own pedals and shoes to use. We hired bikes and spent 7 long hours in 41 degrees of heat trying to punch out this 180 kilometres. And as you can imagine, your mind goes to some crazy places when you're pushing your body that far. I remember my wife was able to travel with us over to the event, and the bike leg itself was 3 laps of a 60-kilometre circuit. And when we got to the end of the second lap, completing 120 kilometres, the furthest I'd ever ridden on a bike, I remember her running alongside me and cheering me on and saying, keep going, and all of these positive things. And I had the bizarre experience that other endurance athletes had warned me about, saying that your body gets pushed so far to the edge that you can actually become a little bit delusional. And so as I rode away to commence my third 60-kilometre lap on the bike, I remember beginning to cry, sitting on the bike, and tears are running down my face. And I was becoming a little bit delusional as I was talking out loud to myself and saying, why am I doing this? I don't have to do this. And I was snapped out of that little delusional moment as another cyclist came past me and looked around and saw me in the state I was in and decided to check in and say, are you okay? Are you doing all right, mate? And that sort of snapped me out of it. But it was a reflection of how far our bodies were getting pushed in that situation, beyond anything we'd ever experienced before, and beyond what I knew I was capable of. I was being challenged all day about whether I could actually get this event done. And so 180 kilometres, I remember vividly on the third lap out in the middle of the forest somewhere, I remember being overtaken by a disabled athlete. One of the rules of Ironman Triathlon is that people are allowed to compete if they are disabled in some way. And this particular gentleman didn't have use of his legs, but the rules around that were they're only allowed to enter if they can find another competitor in the race who's willing to carry them from the swim leg to the bike leg, and then from the bike leg to the run leg. And so his particular bike was a lay-down, reclined, flat bike that he actually pedaled with the use of his hands like this. And I remember struggling away in the forest trying to get through my last 60 kilometres, and down to my right I see this movement of this man coming past on his reclined, modified bike, pumping his arms as he went along without the use of his legs. And he looks up at me and he encourages me from his handicapped position. And it really was a bit of a low point in the day, because I thought, wow, I am going so slow and struggling so much that people who can't even use their legs are overtaking me on the bike. And I'll never forget that part of the experience. And my friend who did the race with me, we had an agreement that we would not try to stay together during the race, but run our own tempo. And I didn't see him from the start of the swim leg through until about 10 kilometres into the marathon at the end. And he finally caught up to me, and we ran together for about 10 kilometres. And I remember him also hitting these incredible, difficult walls of physical exertion that he actually had to stop halfway through the marathon. And he was curled up in the gutter in front of someone's house, trying to vomit with a mixture of disgusting green and black bile, the only thing coming out of his stomach, because he had lost track of his nutrition and hydration plan and had actually become really quite ill. And it's the extent that this kind of a day pushes you to. It takes you to the edge. It takes you to the absolute limit of what you think you're capable of. And I remember in the last 10 kilometres of the run leg that day, the volunteers coming out and giving the competitors who were still out on the course, of which I was one, bringing us glow sticks to attach to our shirts and our singlets, because the sun had already gone down, and we were out there needing to be able to be seen on the course. And so we had to attach these glow sticks to the front of us so we could be seen. And I remember that being another low point, thinking, wow, the sun's gone down. More than half of the competitors are already finished and resting, and I'm still out here on this run leg. But I had to dig extremely deep mentally to get through each of those legs and to keep on going. And there was probably about 8 genuine times through the day where I said to myself, I can't keep going. I can't get through this. I can't get it done. But something deep on the inside kept on speaking to me, saying, you just have to go that little bit further. And so, long story short, I did actually get the race finished, and I've got the medal here to prove it. I thought I'd just give you a quick look at the medal there. There's my very first Ironman Triathlon finishers medal that I got in 2009, and you probably can't see it from here, but on the back of the medal I have the times engraved, and I remember that my first finish time in that triathlon, I've done 4 of these events now, and my first ever time was 14 hours and 49 minutes is how long it took me to complete the race, which is a long day and a long time to be out there. Ironman Triathlon has a 17-hour cutoff, which means you've got to get it finished inside that time. If you are 1 second beyond that time limit, your name doesn't get registered as an official finisher of the event, which has got to be the most brutal realities to live with. But I got finished in 14 hours and 49 minutes. And I tried to wait for my friend to see him come across the line, but I actually got quite ill, had to be taken to the medical tent after my event and get put on a drip, and had the foil blankets over me to try and get my core temperature back to normal. And it was a huge day, huge output, pushed me further than I'd ever been pushed before, physically, mentally, emotionally. And really at that point in my life, one of the greatest challenges I'd ever done. And as I reflect back on it, I guess it's important to ask the question, well, why did I do this? And there's a story behind that, and I hope the answer to my question of why I did this can inspire some of you men watching along. I remember being a young boy, about 10 years old, and where I live in Australia, in the 1980s, there was a very famous sports show adapted from an American show called Wide World of Sports. And this is pre-cable TV. This is back in the day where we only had a handful of channels to choose from. But Wide World of Sports would be on TV every Saturday afternoon for 5 hours. And they would do a global recap of all the biggest stories of sport around the world. And as a young kid who loves sport, it was one of the best ways to get your fix of what was happening around the world in sport. And I remember every year they would do a 3-hour special on the Hawaii Ironman Triathlon. And I remember as a young kid, something getting into my heart and into my mind, a little seed of a thought that said, one day I'd love to be challenged to compete in an event like that, just to find out if I've got what it takes to do it. And sure enough, many years later, that seed sprouted into the idea of, I think I finally want to do it. And so in 2009, in my early 30s, I went to a friend and said, listen, I want to do this Ironman Triathlon. Do you want to do it with me? And I asked him that question in October 2008. The race was scheduled for December 2009. And he said to me, what are you thinking in a couple of years' time? I said, no, I'm thinking next year, and I'm going to register this week. And to his credit, he actually registered with me, and we trained together, and we did the race together, and we both finished. And I really put myself through this grueling 12 months of training in this incredibly brutal race day, because I had this question on the inside, have I got what it takes to get this event done? You see, I thought that I would be mentally and emotionally tough enough, but I didn't know. I needed the context of such a tough experience to find out if I could get the answer to that question. And so that's why I did it. I wanted to be pushed. I wanted to be challenged. I wanted to experience who would I really be in that moment when I hit rock bottom, because my estimate was that inside me was a tough guy who wouldn't quit, but I needed to be in that brutal context to find out if that was true or not. And maybe that's you watching along. Maybe you need to deliberately choose something challenging like this to bring the best out of you. I guess I'd have to ask myself the question as well, what did I learn from that experience? Well, the number one thing I learned is that deep on the inside is the capacity and the ability to go way further than I actually thought I could. And I have leaned on that experience so many times in multiple other areas of my life since that race day, where I've been able to say to myself, Andrew, you got through that event and that experience. You can beat this challenge that you're dealing with right now. And so I'm going to bring an end to this first story in this series of stories on men needing to do difficult things. But I really want to endorse this idea that you heard from Jordan Peterson at the top of the video. Men need to do difficult things. We will never be at our best if we only ever go for comfort and softness and pleasure and recreation. We should enjoy those contrasts when they come along sporadically. However, we need to accept and embrace the challenge that difficult things are part of the journey of a man, part of the making of a man, and actually it can be the making of you as well. If you're enjoying hearing about this particular subject and would like to hear more about it, why don't you go ahead and click on this video right here, where I take a deeper dive into this idea of Jordan Peterson's quote on men doing difficult things. I know you'll love that too, and I'd love to see you in another video.